In this lesson, we're going to take a look at molecular geometry, which is actually the three-dimensional shape that a molecule takes on when it's held together by covalent bonds. Now, molecular geometry depends on the way the electron groups are arranged around the central atom, and it's important because a molecule shape determines its properties, like whether or not it's polar, what kinds of attractions exist between the molecules. And so even though we might have a polar bond, we might not have a polar molecule. It depends on its shape. And the way we predict what molecules will look like is with VSEPR, which is valence shell electron pair repulsion theory. And basically what it says is electrons don't like each other. So bonded electrons will try to push away from other bonded electrons, which will also try to push away from unbonded or lone pair electrons. Okay, so electrons orient themselves so they're as far apart as possible in a molecule because they repel. Now, there are a variety of different shapes that can occur for the electronic geometry. Now, electronic geometry is different or can be different than molecular geometry. Electronic geometry tells us how the electron groups are arranged around the central atom. An electron group can be a single, double, or triple bond, or it can just be a lone pair of electrons. So if there's two electron groups, then those electron groups will be on opposite sides of the central atom, and you get a line or a linear molecule. If there's three electron groups, those three groups will form a triangle around the central atom, so you get trigonal planar. Four electron groups, you can kind of think of this as taking that trigonal planar and then putting another electron group on top, which has the effect of pushing the remaining three electron groups kind of down a little bit. So tetrahedral is a triangular-based pyramid. Trigonal Bi-Pyramidal, so now there's 5 electron groups. So you took your trigonal planar and you put an electron group on top and on bottom. So you have 2 triangular pyramids that are stacked base to base. And then octahedral is 6 electron groups, which will have 4 forming a square around the equator of the central atom, if you'd like, and then 2, one above, one below, which basically gets us 2 square-based pyramids base to base, or an 8-sided figure because it's got 8 triangular faces. Now, these are the shapes that I was just mentioning. So you've got linear, where you have the central atom, and you've got 2 electron groups, one on either side. These electron groups are double bonds. Here we have trigonal planar, where you have a central atom and 3 electron groups for sulfur trioxide. This is the tetrahedral molecule I was talking about, right? There's the 3 that were trigonal planar, and then we added this 4th one that pushed these down a little bit, so they're no longer in the same plane as the central atom. And this is a tetrahedron. It's got 4 sides. If you think about that, it's got 4 triangular faces that connect the molecular or the electronic groups of that thing around the central atom. And this is Trigonal Bi-Pyramidal. You see these 3 around the equator of the central atom, and then one above and one below. Those are called Trigonal Bi-Pyramidal because you've got a triangle and 2 pyramids coming off of that triangular base. And then we have octahedral, where we have these 4 that are in the equatorial plane, and then one above, one below. And if you draw a line from each electron group to each top or bottom, you'll get 4 triangles on top, 4 triangles on bottom, for a total of 8 triangular faces for this octahedral shape. Now, it gets a little bit tricky when there are pairs of electrons that don't bond. So when we have a lone pair, those will push the other electrons groups around the central atom, but electrons are pulled close to the nucleus, so it actually changes the shape from the electronic group for the molecular geometry. So the molecule has a slightly different shape than the electron group. So like this is ammonia, NH3, and you can see the wedge represents an electron group coming towards us. The dashes represent an electron group going kind of into the page. And so you can see these 2 are actually in the plane of the page. And this is tetrahedral geometry, but then the molecular geometry is a little bit different because this electron group is not part of the molecule, it's part of the nitrogen atom. It's not another group, it's not another atom sitting up there. And so the molecular geometry, this is actually trigonal pyramidal because it's not a full tetrahedron because this side doesn't come up to here. it's squished down closer to the central atom. Similar thing is going on here with water. It's got hydrogen, hydrogen, and then it's got these two lone pairs that give it a tetrahedral shape. But when we ignore those electrons, because they're actually pulled in close to this oxygen atom, what we end up with is a bent water molecule. So the molecular geometry is different than the electron group geometry. Now, the next few slides are going to break down the different things that can happen. When we only have two electron groups, it doesn't matter if there's a lone pair out there or not, it's going to be linear. So carbon dioxide is the classic example of that. Trigonal planar, when you have no lone pairs, then of course your molecular geometry matches your electronic geometry, and you end up with a trigonal planar molecule or trigonal planar electron group. So boron trifluoride there. But then you can have trigonal planar electron group geometry, but it's got one lone pair, which results in a bent or angular molecule. So this is our central atom, sulfur. It would, in this example, it's sulfur. And you got a lone pair of electrons over here, and then you have a bonded molecule here, or a bonded atom here, and a bonded atom here. So this is an electron group that's part of the molecule. And so you can see this lone pair of electrons up here is actually forcing those two oxygen atoms closer together. And so we end up with this bent structure. Tetrahedral, so when we have 4 electron groups, it's always a tetrahedral electronic geometry. When there's no lone pairs, that's a tetrahedral molecular geometry. When there's one lone pair, right, this lone pair up here, it gets deleted off of the molecular shape, but it still affects these things, so they're not in a plane anymore. So it's not trigonal planar, like when we had 3 electron groups. They are still pushed down. This is now trigonal pyramidal. And then when we have 2 electron groups that are lone pairs, then we end up with something like water, where we have a bent molecule. 5 electron groups, again, trigonal Bi-Pyramidal, and you can see that, right? We've got our 3 equatorial atoms, and then one above, one below, and that carves out a triangular pyramid on the top, triangular pyramid on the bottom. If we add 1 pair of electrons to that, say we pull it off of that central thing, this is called seesaw, and this is sort of a silly orientation for this picture. But if you were to rotate this whole molecule 90 degrees, you would see these 2 fluorines would actually act as a little feet, and then this molecule could actually rock back and forth like a seesaw. So that's with 1 pair of lone electrons on there. If it has 2 pairs of lone electrons, we get T-shaped. These 2 lone pairs are on one side, and so then you have the top and bottom still, and then the one coming off the side. So you get a T-shaped molecule. And then if you have 3 lone pairs, you get a linear thing. So we lose the 3 central molecule or atoms in the group, and we just get our top and bottom, so those line up. So trigonal pyramidal geometry for the electron still, but it's only linear for the molecule. And then we go to the octahedral groups, which are, remember, 6 pairs of electrons. If we have 1 non-bonding pair or a lone pair, then that comes off of the top or the bottom, and you are left with a square pyramid. If you have 2, then the top and bottom come off, and you're left with square planar.